Thursday, May the 1st, 1952 was Edward Bircher's birthday. When Bircher, a well-known Wichita building contractor, stepped onto the porch of his home on the east side of the city that evening, he was struck by a sudden but already familiar overpowering odour. For several days now, the stench had seemed to emanate from the crawlspace beneath the home in which was described in 1952 as an exclusive Wichita neighbourhood. Thinking he had pondered the issue for long enough, Edward Bircher alerted the police. When they arrived and the house was investigated, police found a military-issue green duffel bag stuffed beneath the wooden stairs at the front of the house. As the bag was shifted and brought into the street, it was clear that this is where the smell emanated from. The contorted, completely nude body of a woman was pulled from the bag. 4 puncture wounds were visible between her breasts, and she was thought by coroner Sam Smith to have been dead for 7 to 10 days. She was described in initial reports as between 18 and 25 years old. She was 5'1" and about 115 pounds. Clothing piled on top of her in the bag, which looked like a maid or waitress uniform, was thought to belong to her. She wore a wedding ring and an engagement ring, but the marking inside the rings were too worn to make out, and all identifying marks and labels were removed from the clothing. The space in which she was found could only be accessed by removing the wooden steps. Behind those steps was a hatch that opened into a small recess. When neighbours of the Bircher family were questioned, they said they'd never seen anyone loitering next to or tampering with the steps. It was reported that as early as May the 2nd, which was the day after the body was found, FBI agents went to the Pentagon to speak to military officials to try to identify the owner of the duffel bag. Detective Claude Nichols said that a check of the Missing Persons Bureau came back with one woman who remotely resembled the victim. However, this woman had only been missing for 3 days, so could not have been the week-long dead woman in the duffel bag. On the same day, following a police radio appeal for information, she was identified by her friends as auburn-haired Mary Jean Brady, a 36-year-old waitress from Wichita, although her age was also given in the press as 32 and 34. Captain R.B. Price, the officer heading the investigation, described the crime as the most cold-blooded murder in the history of the city. The US Army issued bag in which Mary Brady was found bore a name and a serial number. A young man was traced by Missouri Highway Patrol investigators and questioned in Kansas City, but was released after it was revealed that he had turned his bag in some time ago. It had since been resold at a surplus store. Several other people were questioned about the killing before authorities got their final breakthrough. Mary Brady had quite recently separated from her husband, a farm worker named William P. Brady, although the relationship was said to be amicable. In fact, Mr. Brady had raised the alarm when Mary disappeared from a hotel he knew she was staying at in the business district of Wichita on February the 9th. He went to the same hotel and remained there for some time in the hope that she would return. After a few days he gave up and returned to his home in Oxford, Kansas. As is so often the case, despite his apparent concern, Mr. Brady was sought by police for questioning and was at this point the only suspect. When he did speak to the authorities, however, he tipped them off to a young man he knew his wife had been seeing since their separation. His name was Bill, Mr. Brady told them, and he worked for the Coleman Company in Wichita. The young man was said to be in his 20s, so it was no surprise then when police approached the 22-year-old William Dwight Bircher, the son of Edward Bircher, the owner of the house where Mary's body was found. If suspicion did not already lay heavily enough on William Bircher, he was then identified by Mary Brady's husband from a photograph. Two stories were reported in the press at the time. One version that was featured in several newspapers like the one shown here says that William Bircher confessed that he had murdered Mary Brady on April the 20th behind a car dealership, which Bircher said was 12 blocks south of downtown Wichita. This version then goes on to say that Bircher claimed to have taken her body to his apartment and stayed with her corpse for 4 days before transporting it to his parents' house in the dead of night. This version, it must be said, was printed on May the 5th and as far as I can see, was never repeated after that date. However, the date of her death, given here as April the 20th, does tally up with the time of death given by Coroner Sam Smith, which was 7 to 10 days. Remember, she was found on May the 1st. However, the second version of events, which was heavily reported by numerous newspapers nationwide for several days, and appears to be the accepted truth, says that Bircher confessed to killing Mary at his apartment in downtown Wichita on February the 9th, and remained in the apartment with her body until the early hours of February the 15th, which is when he put Mary into the duffel bag, called a cab, and went to his parents' house to dispose of her. This story gives February the 9th as Mary's death date. This was also the date that her husband said she went missing. Again, she was found on May the 1st. Had Mary's body been under the Bircher porch for that length of time, surely it would have been clear to anyone who saw the state of her corpse that she had been there for far more than 10 days, and the coroner's report would have reflected this. It was also reported, as mentioned at the start of the video, that the owner of the house, Edward Bircher, reported a foul smell for several days over the course of late April and early May. Had her body been under the house since February, as latter reports claimed, the smell would likely have been present long before then. So there is a little confusion over the date the murder took place and how long Mary remained beneath the Bircher home. I will continue with the February death date version, as this, despite going against the coroner's reported time of death, appears to be the accepted story. It took some time for detectives Joe Klepper, Rip Reeves and George Elson to get the truth out of William Bircher. At first, a young man who refused to speak to his parents about it claimed that he was too drunk to remember. "I could have done it. I black out sometimes," he said. He went on to say that when he came to, the woman lay dead in the centre of the room. After extensive questioning, William finally broke down and told the detectives what transpired. William, who had been honourably discharged from the army the previous October, said that he'd had several dates with Mary. The pair had been drinking heavily at his downtown Wichita apartment, he said, around the 9th or 10th of February. Following an argument, he said he plunged an ice pick into the already nude woman's chest several times, and stayed in the room with her corpse for 4 days, before putting her into the duffel bag he said he had purchased from Fort Polk, a military base in Louisiana. He then said that late on February the 14th, he held a cab, bundled the duffel bag into the back, and had the driver take him to his parents' address. It was around 1:30 a.m. on February the 15th, Bircher said, when he placed Mary Brady's body beneath the porch. He was held in custody without bond to await his trial. Before his trial began, however, he underwent a psychiatric evaluation. This was based chiefly on the fact that he had lived with Mary Brady's body for 4 days. He was evaluated by 3 doctors who all deemed him sane. On Thursday, June the 5th, 1952, William Bircher pleaded guilty to second-degree murder. Judge William C. Cant passed a sentence of 23 years. The sentence was to be served at the Kansas State Penitentiary in Lansing, which would later become Lansing Correctional Facility. He was to serve 13 years of his 23-year sentence and was released for good behaviour in 1965. Following his release, the now 35-year-old William Bircher initiated a legal battle against prison officials who he claims denied his right to habeas corpus, which is a fundamental right that allows prisoners to question reasons for their imprisonment. I was unable to find out what the outcome of Bircher's case was, but he said in 1965, "It's too late to change the outcome of my murder trial, but I've initiated this new case against prison officials so I can fight for the rights of other guys up there." William Dwight Bircher died in Wichita on November the 15th, 2007. He was 77 years old. After my research into the case, there was one piece of information I was unable to ascertain from online sources. That was the exact location of the Bircher household where William left the body of Mary Brady. I travelled to Wichita from the UK in October of 2022, not just for the purpose of this video, but as I was going to be there, I decided to investigate this case. I paid a visit to the Wichita Public Library. There, with the help of Mr. Tucker on the first floor desk, I was able to find out that in 1952, Edward W. and Margaret A. Bircher, the parents of William, lived at number 202 North Green Street, along with Edward's brother Adolph. Naturally, I headed to North Green Street, but when I got there, I found out that the space where number 202 had once stood was now a parking lot belonging to the Wichita Community Baptist Church. As I stood next to the location where Mary Brady's body was found in 1952, I thought about the difficulty I had in finding the address prior to visiting the local library. Apart from the 1950s newspaper articles, I could not find any other written account of the crime, no contemporary crime books covering it, or even secondary online sources. No one I spoke to in Wichita had heard of the murder of Mary Jean Brady, a killing dubbed the Duffel-bag Murder, which was, at the time, considered by law enforcement to be the most horrendous murder the city had seen. I began to wonder whom, if anyone living, was aware of the location's history.